Erdology, A-E-R-D-O-L-O-G-Y, which is old, proto, old High German for earth. At least that's one of several spellings. There's a Swedish spelling, there's a Austrian spelling, Swedish spelling, a Danish spelling, and so on. But the point is to use the AE from the AT, the AETT of the Futhark is 3 aughts. 3 Fehuzot, Hagwazazot, and Tirzot. Tiwazazot. It's 8 symbols in a structured sequence. And those 8 symbols in a structured sequence actually make up a sphere. Center being Fehu. Then there's up, down, side to side, back and forth, according to the first 2 to 3 sentences of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, center, God created the heavens up, earth down, and then water flew over the waters. Well, that's fly is motion, thermodynamics fly, and to fly over the subject of water requires 2 hydrogen south, 1 oxygen north, a catalyst to put the 2 together, east, then west. So you have up, down, side to side, back and forth, which is a complete sphere. Which is fine and dandy, but without a destination, you cannot have you stop at just the sphere. You have to have stuff going on inside the sphere, you have to have stuff going on outside the sphere, and so on and so forth. You have to have motion, and with motion you have to have time. Erdology is entirely about time. But there's a problem. Inside Erdology is 8 fixed points. And now those 8 fixed points are the 8 fixed points the Earth passes through on its orbit around the Sun. Those 8 fixed points are also in direct reflection of the 24-hour day. Midsummer would be midday, midwinter would be midnight, and the other solstices and equinoxes, the other 6, would be break of dawn, dusk, the time between dawn and noon, and the time between noon and dusk, and opposite, the time between dusk and midnight, and the time between midnight and dawn. That equals out to be 8 fixed points. Those 8 fixed points are reflected in the year, and the year and the day are reflected back and forth, which means that the situation that is present causes a problem. Because the situation that is present is that the spelling of the Gaelic spelling of the time between dusk and midnight, that would be the year equivalent of Halloween. The day and the year equivalent of Halloween is the time between dusk and midnight. That would the dusk would be September 22nd. The name of that specific time period in Gaelic is pronounced 7 in Manx Gaelic, which is the oldest, or it's 7. In Latin, that is pronounced seven, S-E-V-E-N. In Latin, it's spelled S-E-V-E-N. Well, English is spelled that way. But in Manx Gaelic, it's spelled S-A-M-H-A-I-N. There's a particularly difficult sequence of events that are directly connected to this specific fixed point in space. Multiple events in and around the city of Rome, which wasn't always called that. Previous to 576, 753 BC, the city was called the City of Seven Hills. Since Latin would not exist for 100 years, and none of the Romance language would be even in near existence for 500 years, the City of Seven Hills, there's only one language in the entire area that it could be. It could either be Gaelic, or it could be Linear A, because those are the languages that were in existence back then on the north side of the Mediterranean. The south side, of course, had hieroglyphics and whatever the Carthage people spoke, also the Trojans, which would be and the Trojans have spoken something close to Linear A, because that would be within the Cyclotic culture, the Minoan culture. That is Hyksos/Dorian fiction. That's has anti-Semitism up to, through, and around it in all directions. It's horrible. For the amount of fiction present. The problem is that if you go to the meaning of each of those specific 8 holidays means, the Candlemas would be Imbolc, which is what Imbolc translates to Candlemas. Candlemas, the return of the light. When there's defined proof that the days were getting longer from midwinter, which would be Yule log. There's a whole massive amount of stuff about the Yule log, Adam's Yule log, regarding Heliopolis, and Heliopolis that has one long, complicated, intense history to it. A monster city came into existence when writing came into existence, and Heliopolis was already a huge to-do. Where Heliopolis used to be has been slightly lost to history, because that's the way the Romans and the Greeks and the Vatican wanted it. And multiply that by infinity times infinity. The biggest problem is that all this hiding and all this trying to suppress and to destroy and burning libraries and killing scholars, the Dorian Dark Age and the Vatican Dark Age, the medieval ages, the witch hunts, the witch burning times, the suppression of there for a while in Rome, it was illegal to own any kind of fowl, because the feathers might be used as writing instruments, and people might just take anything and start writing something down. Numbers were illegal, letters were illegal. It was writing was suppressed so hard for several centuries by the Vatican that priests, only a select number of priests were taught how to read. All the rest of the priests were taught memorization and were sent out into the world to proselytize, but they were just as ignorant as the people they were converting. regarding knowing how to read. Nobody knew how to read because the Vatican didn't want anybody but themselves knowing how to read, because they did not want their authority questioned. Now, the city of Samhain, which would be what Rome's old name used to be, and what Caesar tried to rename the city when he became emperor and installed and destroyed the Roman Republic and recreated the imperial Rome. The city used to be called the City of Seven Hills, the City of Seven, S-E-V-E-N. What does any of this have to do with Erdology? Well, I'll get there. The same exact name of Rome, which comes into it was previous to Romulus's birth, and with Julius Caesar and with the emperors of Rome. The same name is used on both ancient and with Julius. The same exact name is used in Erdology as one of the key fixed points of the day and the year, Samhain, the Halloween, October 31st. This makes things even more complicated because the events that took place in Rome, in the city of Samhain, are one of the reasons why the Vatican wanted the Dark Ages, because they wanted it to have everyone too ignorant to know how to read for several hundred years to break the back of the knowledge, to make sure that the knowledge of what they were trying to hide would be truly lost forever. The problem is that there's enough evidence in what remained to rebuild it. And no matter what you do, when you're dealing with super intelligent cultures that focus entirely on education and knowledge, when you start destroying them, they're going to hide their secrets somewhere, and their secrets are reclaimable. Their secrets are findable. There's a vault door someplace, which is what the definition of rune means. Rune means vault door, secret or hidden meaning. Well, what is behind a vault door? It means there's something secret hidden behind there. The Futhark is a secret and hidden meaning. The crucifixion took place in Rome, not Levant lands. In truth, the crucifixion took place, quite literally theorized, just feet away from where Caligula had the city of Heliopolis and the structure of the recreated temple of IWNW. Those two structures were moved by Caligula from Egypt to the Vatican Hill, next to the Vatican Hill, a dry dock next to the Vatican Hill. That was he had the marsh next to the valley drained, and a dry dock built, and the ship was sailed into the dry dock, and then the dry dock was filled in. The entire physical structure behind all aspects of Rome, the Punic War, is interesting because when the Romans finally conquered the city of Carthage, they took the buildings apart, shipped them to Rome, and rebuilt the core of Rome with the remains of the buildings of Carthage. Julius Caesar, had Memphis moved from where it was to Rome, another Julii estate, and it's still there. Heliopolis and the temple of IWNW, which was by legend built by Adam himself, was moved from Egypt and moved to the Vatican. the crucifixion started in the forum, in the original forum building. 60. See here. The Ides of March is 44, so that it's 44 years to the zero. So it's 44 plus, so 70 plus 33 plus 44. That's 76, or give or take 7 years after Julius was assassinated. Just a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 100 feet, 200 feet away from where Julius Caesar was assassinated, 70 years later, I theorize that one of his grandchildren, well, at that point, his great-grandchildren, was put on trial for being a threat, the largest, most intense, massive threat to the empire, a enemy of the state, was arrested and brought to the Senate, tried as being a threat to the empire, and was sentenced to death, execution. Problem is the execution would have been in 2 forms. One, it would have been crucifixion, but only a few hours, just to get the bloodlust that his enemies hated. His hated enemies, he did not hate them; they hated him. To satisfy their bloodlust, he would have been tortured for several hours, and then put on the cross, and then tortured for multiple hours, and then he would have been pulled off of the cross and stabbed to their heart by the blade of Longinus. The blade is called Longinus, not the man. The man is the carrier of Longinus. The carrier of Longinus would be Joseph of Arimathea, who was the head of the Jewish Council of Rome, which means by default, Joseph of Arimathea would be one, extraordinarily rich. 2, there'd been no possible way for him not to have ownership of land in Rome proper, which means that if he owned land in Rome proper, one of his tasks would have been to have at least one male family member per generation in the military. Lifelong career. That's just Roman rules from day one to when the empire collapsed. If you owned land in Rome, one male out of every generation had to be in the military. Some families, almost every male joined the military. In some other families, only 1 or 2 males joined the military. But there was no paying your way out. If you had males, one of those males was going to be in the military, period. The question is not if, the question was which one. So Joseph, either him or one of his relatives, his male relatives, close male relatives, brother, son, father, uncle, would have been in the military. Now, if he had no sons, then Dad or one of his uncles would have had to been in the military. If he had no sons, then one of his cousins would have had to be in the military. His uncle's children, unless they were all girls, and one of their sons, they would have had to be in the military. So that's no girls in the military, only boys, and you can have all girls, but their sons would have been in the military. No middle ground to that. So the crucifixion, according to statistics, took place in Rome proper. The trial took place less than a couple hundred feet away from where Julius was assassinated. Julius was assassinated because he was a Jew. The Ides of March becomes he was a Jew, not because of any other reason. He was a Jew. There's a mountain of evidence of why he was a Jew and how much the Senate tried to cover it up. But the point of hard fact is he was a Jew, and there was no getting around the fact that he was a Jew. The other problem is so was Cleopatra. Cleopatra was a Jew too. But that's not the Ptolemaic family had been closet Jews for hundreds of years. That's not. Alexander was a Jew. There's nothing wrong with Jews, just the Romans hated them. And Eusebius' line hates them, the Dorians, the Hyksos, the Avaris. The Romans hate Jews. They hate Jews to an equal amount as the Third Reich, as Adolf hated Jews. What does this have to do with anything? Well, if Erdology is if the offspring of Erdology is Hebrew, because the parent of Hebrew is the Elder Futhark. And the Elder Futhark was put together in part based off of this calendar, the T calendar, the 8 fixed point, measuring to and from 8 fixed points per over the course of the Earth's orbit, not the 9th calendar, of course, being your birth date. Whatever your birth date is, doesn't matter. It's the human species wide birth date. That's the 9th count. Define Halloween. It's where the veil between Earth and other dimensions is the thinnest, which means that back to the sphere we discussed at the very, very beginning. To go from one day to the next day requires going through the veil between one sphere to create another sphere, or another already created sphere. Well, to be able to go through that veil requires that veil to be either at its thinnest, or the continuity line from the center to the next center has to be very strong. To reach from the center to the south is a continuity line. To reach from the center to the north is a continuity line. Center to the east, center to the west. That there had to be structure there for God to, and the thermodynamics had to be. Thermodynamics comes from structure, and structure is from continuity lines, from physical energy connection between point A and point B. Well, in this case, it'd be point A, point B south, point C north, D east, E west. So you gain the understanding that where the wall inside the sphere and outside the sphere is the thinnest is where that electromagnetic continuity line extends from the center to the next point. Well, the center to the next point, Halloween is the veil is the thinnest between the sphere, the veil is basically the same thing, is the thinnest between the worlds. So since it is the thinnest, many cultures try to interact with and or contact the dead or the ones that are passed on or something to that effect during the time of Halloween. In fact, at Halloween, Western culture has created a monstrous amount of information and mythos and fiction regarding the state of Halloween. Halloween costumes, horror films, ghosts and goblins and skeletons and a witch's brew and all these things are all about other realms, other dimensions, paranormal activity, supernatural activity, so on and so forth. This is all associated with Halloween, all associated with Samhain. The Mexican culture, Latino culture, also has the Day of the Dead, which is basically the same thing, but from a different cultural perspective. So when you have so you have the format and you have the structure of Halloween being the veil is thinnest between dimensions, and you have the Punic War taking place in Rome, and Hannibal coming to the gates of Rome, and then for some reason withdrawing, which makes no sense whatsoever unless you look at it from a different point of view. He came to the gates of Rome to gain their attention, so that his population could evacuate out of Carthage and to Britain and set up shop in Britain. And they had about 150 years between the end of the Punic War, when Carthage was destroyed and the buildings taken apart, shipped to Rome, and then rebuilt. And the buildings that were in disrepair in the center of Rome, they were repaired based off of quarrying the buildings of Carthage. Those are huge events. Those are and the veil between worlds, that kind of a little bit makes sense. Trying to take the power of Carthage and merge the power of Carthage into the power of Rome, merging the power of Troy and of Athens and of several of the other major Greek cities and other cities around, taking their buildings apart, moving them to Rome and rebuilding, taking Memphis and merging, taking their power and in effect consuming it, eating it, taking 2 cities and making them one, taking 50 cities and making them one, is right in line with the veil is the thinnest. You can take 50 cities and make them all one, because the veil is the thinnest in that city. The crucifixion took place in Rome. The Vatican is the city of Heliopolis. The Sistine Chapel, based on a theory of mine, is quite literally the temple of IWNW. It's materials. It's been remodeled 20 times in the last 6,500 years, but that doesn't mean it's not the same thing. From 4500 BC to present, it's been remodeled and moved a couple times, but it's been remodeled. But the remodeling, it doesn't remove the solid components. It just reshapes them into a different form. All the masonry is taken apart, but rebuilt. The same stones are rebuilt, are requarried into different shaped walls. They don't take the walls apart, the masonry apart, the stones apart, toss them someplace else, and bring in all new stones. No, that's ridiculous. They take it apart and reuse the materials. They may or may not reuse the wood, because it may or may not be rotted, but they do reuse all the stone. Which is interesting, because the Versailles, which is monstrously huge, its original little hunting lodge is still there. Just Versailles was built around it, up, over, down, and around it. In fact, Louis insisted on the core of the hunting lodge that he had fun at as a child. It remained intact, and he had his grand palace built around that, his fun childhood home. Next up, the next problem that comes up is that in the city of Rome, there was a major, hardcore, huge battle that took place in Rome at about 635 to 640 AD, where every army that had the capacity to sent troops to Rome, and they battled it out in both Rome and Lake Nemi, where the Lake Nemi ships had been fine and dandy for the previous 600 years. The towers were still intact. It was just fine and dandy. It was 600 years old, but it was almost the Caligula ships were almost perfectly intact. Everything was cool. When the armies left, the towers were completely obliterated, and the top 10 feet of the ship below the water level, the 10 feet from the water level down, was also obliterated. Now, over time, over the next century, from 10 feet down to just above the gunwales was scrapped, and the materials were made into stuff and sold to tourists, sold to the locals, sold for whatever purpose. That battle was huge and almost the definition of Armageddon, because the size of the battle was so intense. But that battle took place in the city of the Vales. The city where the veil between this world and the next world is the thinnest. It's also the headquarters of the Vatican, where the veil is the thinnest. There's another battle, a sequence of battles, another sequence of wars that took place on a different continent, but with all the same people and almost all the same cultures involved. You had the Muslims through the Free Corps and the Persian Empire, and you had a step down Muslim from the English, and you had the British, who were the Gaelic speakers, and you had some colonists who were not called Americans yet. They were still called colonists. A few. They fought out a monstrously huge war called the 7 Years' War, otherwise known as the French and Indian War, from the Mississippi east. And that war was primarily fought to gain access to libraries and gain access to information that would allow the enemy to gain weapons that would allow them to go fight humans, to conquer all humans, and to eventually go cross the veil and go fight over there too and conquer over there. Now, if that's just conquer death, or to conquer over, to go to heaven and conquer God, to take over his throne, to rule things properly, or what have you, it doesn't matter. The fact is that the name, the 7 Years' War, only one of the cultures involved spoke English. The rest of the cultures spoke either OC French, Dutch, Spanish. Most of the participants spoke Gaelic. And the OC French and Gaelic is not exactly dissimilar. They're pretty similar languages. So calling the spelling it Samhain war is quite correct. The English changed it to Seven because that was easiest, because they didn't want to spell it in Gaelic, they wanted to spell it in English. They also wanted to insult their enemy by throwing out the 7 Years' War entirely and calling it the French and Indian War, because they wanted to. There was a whole. The English didn't want to be called English anymore. The English wanted to be called British, even though the British were still in existence. But all they had to do is not stop using the word British and start using the word Indian, or start using the word barbarian or some slave or something else, and the English could then adopt the facade of England, of Britain, and started saying, "Oh, we're British," it's like, well, that's nothing could be farther from the truth. You're Romans. Just because you picked the name first Anglo and then Anglo-Saxon and then English does not mean you're not still Romans. So you have the 7 Years' War name, and the participants are the same. And you have the 7 Years' War, and you have the War of 640 in Rome, between all the same participants. The Ogle family is directly involved in both the American War, 1753, 1754, and 640. And you have the crucifixion, which there's more than a little bit of evidence regarding the Ogle family had direct involvement in that. The Eucharist, the blood of Christ, Sangreal. There's 100 more references to Northumberland code in virtually almost every aspect of Christianity, the crucifixion and the nativity. You can barely throw a rock in. You can barely go 2 paragraphs in the New Testament and not run into a reference to Northumberland. The miracle of him walking on water, he goes up onto a hill and prays, and is divinely touched, and then walks down and then walks on water to save his. He walks up onto a hill, defined area, up vertical, and then communes with God himself. Well, north, vertical, umber, divine, land, defined area. You could barely go 3 or 4, 5 paragraphs without getting a reference to it. The code, Northumberland. Without a compass, what is north? North is the North Star. That's vertical. There is no compass bearing north. It's all vertical. And that's English. Northumberland is English. The family name is YR Hen Ogle DD. What does the Ogle family have to do with Erdology? Well, one of the things that the Ogle family used to own, is they used to be experts in Erdology. They were experts in Erdology for up until about 200 years ago. The Ogles owned the books, owned the libraries, owned the information, and this is their thing. They owned thousands of libraries, millions of books, and were experts in this kind of mathematics, this kind of information. They were experts in time. They were experts in the language of time, and that's one of the reasons why they were from the 1500s forward. They were sought out to be obliterated, which is not the first time they've been sought out to be obliterated. Just this time was the most effective because almost the entire family has forgotten who they used to be. The command and control structure was not lost from 680 to 1066. The command and control structure was not lost. The army, the navy, the libraries, the culture was maintained for those 400 years. The veil is the thinnest for Halloween, for Samhain. The veil is the thinnest. The Ogle family took direct part in the crucifixion by code, the 640 battle, everything that took place between the Viking Age was you could just as easily call the Viking Age the Northumberland Age, because it's the Northumberland family were the power in that time period. Viking means shallow inlet where they would park their ship. Their ship would be made of wood, which is the color of amber. They would park their ship into a small inlet, defined area, a defined inlet area, a defined area, and they would sleep on they would live and sleep on their ship, and then make forays in by swimming or going across the water onto the land, and create footholds into wherever they were. That's a raised platform, vertical. Their ships were wood, and their ships had a lot of gold in them, a lot of use of amber for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is a navigation aid. If you compress amber, you will release electricity. If you have any kind of metal on board and you have that metal floating on something, and that piece of cork, a leaf floating on water or something, then you have an automatic compass. There's amber on board almost all Viking ships. Authentic Viking ships, not the recreations. The authentic Viking ships, you have amber on board so that you can create a compass. But you can also hide the fact that you're creating a compass when you encounter an enemy who is ignorant of how to sail point to point across vast oceans. The Norse, the English, not the British, the Norseman, anyone who was connected to the Ogle family had the ability to make a compass. Nobody else understood how to make a compass. The compass is another way of indicating that electromagnetics, the charged needle, the polarized needle, polarized metal on something floating on water. That is in itself the definition of Northumberland. The ship is the definition of Northumberland. And what makes the compass rotate is Samhain, where the space between the worlds is the thinnest, because it allows for the motion of the compass. It allows for the motion of the world. It allows for the motion of time. You have Jesus Christ directly involved with this exact same concept. You have the Lake Nemi ships, which were built almost the day that Christianity started. The Lake Nemi ships were built. You have the Vatican is Noah's Ark. The Sistine Chapel theoretically is the Temple of IWNW, which was hand built by Noah shortly after the Exodus from heaven type situation. All these events taking place in Rome, which its real name was Samhain. The veil is thinnest between the worlds. In that city, all this knowledge was a battleground in Tiffin, Ohio. The result was 100 years later, the founding of the University of Heidelberg, and there's a mountain of garbage that goes along with the founding of Heidelberg, because nobody will admit where the books came from, even though there was several rooms where the books that founded Heidelberg University in 1850, no one will admit where the books came from, because these were not books, these were not C-Dick run books. These were, most of them were other languages, ancient languages, and it's Heidelberg University, Tiffin, Ohio, 1845 is also where psychology started. The Ogle family are about 3, 4, 500,000 feet away to the west. It was their library that they got. That it was the Ogle family, Thomas and Joseph Ogle. It's their library from Harvard that had been captured previous, and a couple of other, and Trinity School and Trinity University and such. Those books came from Edinburgh, which is only 70 miles north of Ogle Castle. And Edinburgh, for the last 2,000 years, the majority of the time, for the last 3,000 years, minus the last 200 years, Edinburgh sat in the kingdom of Northumberland. Although, previous to 800 years ago, it wasn't called Northumberland. It was, 900 years ago, it was called the kingdom of Ogle. So you have a triumvirate of things happening all at the same time that are keys to what Erdology used to be and how it used to work and why it was so important that it took thousands of years to destroy Erdology, but once it was destroyed, it's too big to destroy, so there's so many elements of it that are left behind that it only took 30 years and a lot of determination to rebuild it. Now the question for you is, how much of what I've described in the last bit are you interested in pursuing on your own to understand more about the function and structure of Erdology as it applies to the veil between the worlds, as well as the structure of time?